Hey everybody, thanks for watching. This is an introduction to chemistry from a biblical perspective. So let's start with this question. What is chemistry? Chemistry is the study of the composition, properties, and behaviors of matter. There's probably other definitions we could use, but this definition fits for our purposes. So what exactly is matter? Matter is the stuff that everything in the universe is made of. So when we study chemistry, we're studying the composition, properties, and behaviors of everything in the universe. So what about composition? How does chemistry deal with composition? Chemistry explains what matter is made of. That's what it means to study the composition of matter. Some substances are made of just one thing, one molecule, or one compound. We would call that a pure substance. But many substances in the universe, in fact, most of them, are made of different kinds of materials. They're not just one thing, and we would call those mixtures. So here's a few questions to see if you understand what that means. Let's start with this one. What is water made of? Do you think it's a mixture or a pure substance? If you want to, you can pause this video and write down your answer. Water is actually a pure substance. It is made of just one molecule that has the chemical form of H2O, which we'll talk about later in this course. So water is an example of a pure substance. However, you should also know that most of the time when you collect water, if it's out of your sink or out of a pond or out of a river, it's not technically pure water. Water most of the time has other things mixed into it, like bacteria or minerals or salts. But if it is just water, then water itself is a pure substance. It's made of just one molecule or one compound. Here's another question to test your understanding. What do you think wood is made of? Do you think wood is a mixture or a pure substance? Pause the video if you want to and write down your answer. Wood is actually an example of a mixture. Wood is not just one thing. If we could use a really strong microscope to look at the structure of wood, we would see that it's made of many, many different kinds of things. Here's another question. What do you think dirt is made of? Do you think it's a mixture or a pure substance? Pause the video and see if you can figure out the answer. Sometimes dirt might look like a pure substance, but it's also a mixture. Again, if we could use a very powerful microscope and look at the structure of dirt, what we'd see is many, many different kinds of things make up dirt or soil. So what about properties? What does it mean to study the properties of matter? Here's how chemistry is involved. Chemistry explains the different properties or characteristics of substances. And here's a few examples, like flammability, toxicity, solubility, and acidity. There are other types of chemical properties, but these are some of the ones that you might be most familiar with already. So here's a practice question for you. What are some examples of flammable materials? To start with, you should know the definition of flammability. A flammable material is something that will easily burn under normal conditions. And you probably already know this, that there's some things that start on fire very easily and other things that don't seem to burn at all. So answer this question then. What are some examples of flammable materials? Pause the video and write down your answer. Here's a few examples that I thought of, just common things that you might find around your house. Nail polish is flammable. Hand sanitizer is actually flammable. It includes a type of alcohol that is quite flammable. Cooking oil, even though we use it to make our food, it is also very flammable. Gasoline, you probably know, is flammable. But flour and many other things that you find in your house are all examples of flammable materials. Here's another example of a chemical property we can discuss. What about toxicity? Can you think of some toxic materials? Once again, we'd better have a good definition of what it means to be toxic in the first place. A toxic material is something that causes harm to living things, especially when it comes into contact with a living thing or is ingested by a living thing. Now that you know that definition, can you think of anything that is a toxic material? Pause the video if you want and write down your answer. Here's a few examples of toxic materials that I thought of. There's lots of things that we make toxic on purpose. For example, If you've ever had a mouse problem in your house or in a barn, you might have used mouse poison. Well, it's toxic on purpose to help eliminate the mice. Weed killer is another example of this. If you've ever had weeds growing in your driveway or around your garden or someplace where you didn't want the weeds growing, you can buy weed killer, which is toxic to weeds. Some other things that you might find around your house that are toxic include hydrogen peroxide. There's also certain plants and mushrooms that are also very toxic. That's why it's important if you go out into nature, you don't just pick up any random plant or mushroom and try to eat it. It might be good for you, or it might be really dangerous. And that quality that makes it harmful to living things like you, that's what we call toxicity. Here's another question that we can answer by chemistry, talking about the properties of different materials. Can you think of some water-soluble materials? Once again, it's important to know what water-soluble means. A water-soluble material is something that dissolves in water. And you probably know that some things dissolve in water and some things don't. I'll give you one example. If you put salt into water, it'll seem to disappear in the water. It dissolves into the water. But if you put a copper coin, like a penny, into water, it doesn't dissolve into water. It stays completely intact and does not become distributed through the water. So water soluble means that the material dissolves into water. Here's a few examples that I could think of that you can easily find around your house. Things like salt and sugar. Both of those materials are considered water soluble because they dissolve or break down into the water. Here's a few examples of things that are non-soluble. Non-soluble materials include things like oil, sand, wood, plastic. Those things can be put into water, but they don't dissolve into water. Another part of chemistry is studying the behavior of matter. Here's what that means. Chemistry explains why and how some substances interact with other substances. It also explains why some substances don't interact with each other. The combination of substances to create other substances is called a chemical reaction. Here's a few questions about the idea of behaviors to see what you understand about this. Let's start with this question. Why does a car use gasoline? You probably have been with your family when they filled up their vehicle with gasoline. Well, why do we do that? Pause the video and see if you can write down a correct answer. Cars are a good example of an everyday thing in life that use chemistry. Gasoline is flammable, and it actually explodes inside of the engine, which creates energy that is used to turn the components and the wheels of the vehicle. So the combustion that takes place inside of the engine is a great example of a chemical behavior that we use to our benefit as humans. Here's another question about the behavior of matter that we study with chemistry. Why does metal rust? You've probably noticed this before, that if you leave certain types of metal outside and they get wet, then they'll begin to rust. They develop that reddish, powdery material on the outside of the surface. So why does that happen? Pause the video and write down your answer if you think you know why metal rusts. Rust is another really good example of chemistry at work. Iron in the metal combines with oxygen in the air to form a new chemical called iron oxide, but we usually just call it rust. And you've probably noticed that not all metals will rust. The only type of metal that really rusts in the way that we traditionally think about it is metal that includes iron. There's other types of metal that are not iron, and they don't rust in the same way that iron will rust. Here's another question that involves chemistry. Why does your mouth produce saliva? Saliva is actually a chemical produced by your body. Sometimes we think of chemicals as being like man-made things that are bad, but actually your entire body is made of chemicals, and the saliva in your mouth is a type of chemical that God created in you to be produced to help your body in the digestion of food. So God did this. God created our bodies to use chemistry. So here's a challenge question. How have you used chemistry today? I'd like you to pause the video and write down some answers. This is a really interesting question because there's almost no wrong answers. Basically, everything you did today involved some kind of chemistry. When you stood out of your bed, your body was using special chemical reactions to make your muscles flex and help you stand up. The same thing happened when you walked to the bathroom. If you took a shower or a bath today, the soap that you used uses a special combination of chemicals to help remove the dirt and germs from your body. If you brushed your teeth today, your toothpaste probably uses special chemicals that help clean your teeth. If you ate breakfast, you were using chemistry. You were actually giving your body a new supply of special chemicals that your body will then use to give you energy through the rest of the day. Here's another challenge question. Where do you see chemistry working in this room? Not the room that I'm in, but the room that you're in. Where do you see chemistry working? Pause the video and try to write down some answers. This is another interesting question because, again, there's almost no wrong answers. Everything that you can see probably involves some type of chemistry. It involves the properties or behaviors or substance of matter. When you turned on the lights in the room that you're in, there's chemistry being used to create that light. The material that your room is built out of, including the floor, the walls, and the ceiling, were all picked because they include the right kind of chemicals to be strong and sturdy, to be used in the way that you're using it. Here's another challenge question. Compare a piece of wood and a piece of metal and explain how they're different. Even if you don't have a piece of wood and a piece of metal in front of you, you've seen both of those types of materials. So pause this video and try to write down some specific ways, be as specific as you can, about how metal and wood are different. Metal and wood are the same in some ways. They're both solid, they're both firm, and probably pretty strong. But metal and wood are also very different in some very specific ways. Metal tends to be shiny, wood is not. Metal is flexible, but wood is usually not. Metal will sink, most metals, I should say, will sink in water, but wood floats on top of water. That refers to density. They also have different levels of flammability. Under normal conditions, it's not too hard to start wood on fire, but metal does not usually burn under normal conditions. So those are some of the simple examples of how wood and metal are different, and we can describe those differences using chemistry. Thanks for watching.